Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, glad you're back on the Investigative Journal on this last day of July 2017 here on this Monday. And I got a great show planned for you, especially if you're a Christian. And I think you're going to enjoy this. You may not like everything you hear, but I think you're going to really take away from this maybe a better way to debate non-believers. And that's strictly up to you. But we'll get to that in a second. But first, I had to comment on a couple emails that I got regarding posts on my website. First of all, if you go to arcticbeacon.com, that will direct you to a new site called GregAnthony'sJournal.wordpress.com. There, of course, I ask you to hit that donate button to see if we can keep this show on the air. I have to run a pledge drive all next month and have decided to see if we can raise enough money to keep the show going. So help me out. Go to arcticbeacon.com. You can get shows going all the way back over a decade regarding the Vatican-led New World Order. Well, I'm going to read a couple posts that I put up on my website, and these are the recent ones. After my Friday broadcast, I put all my broadcasts up as well, so you can get all those here. And the emailer said, Greg, you seem to be speaking a lot about death lately. You're talking a lot about the loss of your animals, and a number of your shows in the last week have been replays of people who have died. And what's up? Are you feeling okay? I said, yes. Well, to be honest with you, this is a difficult time in my life. And I'm talking about I'm doing these posts in a sense because we all grieve in different ways. And yes, I've lost a number of people close to me lately, as well as my two good animal friends. And so let me read the post here if you haven't gone there. If you do, this one was from yesterday or the day before, and I said that I call it the man who swims with crocodiles. And it goes like this. Over the course of the last 14 years, I created a very strong internal bond with my two dogs, Miss Moose and Max. You know, I loved a girl once, and she left me because she said I spent too much time with my dogs. She didn't understand it was a different kind of love. Most people don't. I would talk to Max and Moose often, communicating without words, and when times were tough, I mean tough, and when I thought all hope was gone, we communicated through our eyes, sometimes even telepathically, and sometimes through our touch. They always seemed to have the answers, saying, "Don't worry, Greg, there's a God out there, and everything's going to be okay." And they're both gone now, but I still try communicating. A good friend of mine lost his dog Annie and emailed me the other day saying he thought at first it was just an emotional attachment, but it must be something more. I wrote him back saying, as far as the emotional attachment with Annie, you can bet you will always have one. I was close, very close to Moose and Max, with them every day for 14 years. And I felt lucky, and a day doesn't go by now that they don't return to me in some way. I still can't talk about it without tears. We all have our own way of grieving. I lost both of them in the last 6 months and Max just 3 weeks ago. And when I return home, I am lost and don't really want to be there. Sometimes I cry out in anger at God. Sometimes I fall into the chair feeling hopeless. I still talk to them, pretending they're in the car. I look back and I start talking to them. In fact, now I even bring them into the grocery store since they were always too big and to go in there. And may I say, I think that was dog discrimination because I used to go into the grocery store and these little dogs would be in these little purses, but I couldn't bring Big Max in or Miss Moose. but now they go in the grocery store. Now no one sees them but me, and as I got closer to them, over the years I found they learned to communicate with me before I did with them. Once I learned words were not needed. The bond was tight. And I believe all animals want to communicate with us, but modern man has really turned the animal world into playthings, objects, or even enemies. You know better than me, I told my friend, the Native American bond with animals. So this loss you feel is partly the loss of an ancient bond you had with Annie, an ancient cry to be with nature and animals lost in modern society. I try to keep my mind busy now, and one reason I work away from home now all the time is I can't and I could not have imagined working from home now, as even now I see them sitting next to me while I'm typing. Well, one of my listeners sent me this YouTube, and I thought you might enjoy it. So go to my website, and you can look at it. It's very interesting, and it spurred me on to write this. It's a story about the man who swims with crocodiles. And there's a good intro, but the real meat of the video starts at the 8-minute mark. Okay. So, then yesterday, thinking about all those shows I did, about all the people I lost, and Max and Moose, I did last week and the week before, I decided to put something down about death. I never liked to think about it. When my mother died when I was young, I put death out of my mind. In fact, I was so crazy. Maybe we all are in a sense. But when you're young, you never think you're going to die. And I think even 10 years ago, 14 years ago, when I got Max and Moose, I thought they'd live forever. So I guess people say you got to deal with it. It's a part of life when you get older, or it could happen to you at any time. I always wonder why God takes people so young. I mean, a baby 2 years old, or just 3 days old, or why a kid at 17 loses his life getting hit in a car accident. I mean, to me, it's when I start thinking those things, my brain starts going crazy. And I wrote this. It's called Greg's Story of Death. Here today, gone tomorrow. And I said, in the end, we are all fearless. We are fearless souls fighting right to the end. For what? Fighting? Like fools in a cage, never knowing, never seeing. We fight like rats, and we are no better, at least now. Could it change? No, not till death. Death brings us there whether we like it or not. It's a question of time. How much? How little? What have we wasted? What have we gained? What will we do the seconds before the curtain goes down? I personally will have a glass of wine, nothing fancy, white, nice white like I like it. Think of it. Nobody likes to think of their last wish. Nobody, nothing, poof. Like I, you, we, me, we're never ever here. And there or everywhere. How many souls left that way? So many you can't count them all. How many? More than you know. More than you will ever know. But at last check, all of us will be added to the list, a list known as here today and gone tomorrow. Okay, I wanted to read those to you, and that emailer was correct. I guess I wanted to get all of that stuff out of my chest so I can move on in life, because we're stuck here, right? There's no other choice we have. And my days lately have been miserable when I come back to this house. So I just wanted to tell you that. Now, let's move on. Let's try. I'm going to try to move on, and I'm sure you will. But today, I'm going to play something by a guy by the name of Dinesh D'Souza. And if you don't know him, he's done a couple huge documentaries about the Clintons and all of their corruption, as well as the Democratic Party, etc. Now, he was born in India, a very good speaker, and he was born in a Christian family in India. He emigrated here when he was 17, and he professes to be a Christian. And he likes to debate atheists. And you'll see a lot of videos on that. Now, there's one video he did about, it's entitled How I Know God Exists, and he did it at Saddleback Church. Now, that made me wonder about him, because you know what I'm talking about when I talk about the fake Christians in these ecumenical churches that are in the ecumenical movement, actually working with the Jesuits. Now, D'Souza, when you listen to what he says, there's going to be some real tricky things there that'll give you clues to who he is, really is. And that's up to you. But I do take something from him that's good, and you can always find that. Now, this is. Let me just preface it, and then you can listen to it, because I think we'll spend this show on it, maybe another tomorrow, because I want to bring. I found another article that was quite interesting. It was by a non-believer who was a believer, decided to be a non-believer, and he says 21 reasons why I will not debate Christians. And I read that. Now, here's the point. I'm going to give Christians some advice today, whether you like it or not. And I'm not trying to do anything under the table. I don't have any hidden agendas. I'm just looking at it from a personal point of view. Now, I came, like I said, I was a Catholic turned atheist, and I felt I was a Christian, and I have setbacks all the time. And because I'm on a Christian radio station and I have a lot of Christian friends, they're always giving me advice. And when I say something that sounds a little like, he may be straying away from the Word of God, the advice is always to go to the Bible, to read this verse or that verse. And I started thinking, I said, well, okay, that's good, I think, for when you're talking to Christians, they'll understand you. But does the non-believer understand you? Now let me say this. D'Souza brought up something interesting, and I agree with him on this. Because if you look back 30 to 40 years ago, atheists and the movement of atheism and the secular movement was, in a sense, not as well organized as it is today. It was a whole different ballgame. It was almost as if they said to Christians, okay, your philosophy we don't agree with, you're way out of sync with what's going on in the New World, but you're okay, you can go to your churches, you can go home, we're not going to bother you or your offspring. You have that right in America. But now, folks, there is a stepped up, organized, satanic, or whatever you want to call it, non-believer secular movement that's not happy with that. They want to eradicate Christianity. They want to take your kids when they leave your house, if you're a Bible-believing Christian, and they want to they want to grab them and change them. They don't want you to worship at home anymore. They don't want you here anymore. It's an organized effort. But I think Christians are not keeping up with this. They don't understand it, and most Christians don't. And I'm going to give you some advice. When you go to a non-believer and you tell them, and you get into an argument about this and that, about the book of Genesis, and you start spouting off, go to Genesis, or you hand them a brochure that gives them all these Bible verses, they will dismiss you so fast that it's not even worth it. And the reason is atheism has changed. It is not the same anymore. It is something completely different. It is organized. It is there to attack the very foundations in the entire world and to eradicate Christians. So how do you deal with it? You're not going to get anywhere with the old methods. And that might have been fine even 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or even back, hundreds of years ago. But the movement now is different. It is a total different story. And so my recommendation to you is to think of another way to deal with non-believers. Think of another way. It's not going to work. And I'm not denigrating or saying anything against the Word of God. You can tell me anything you want. Give me any Bible verse you want. But that's not going to work with the hardcore atheist of today. And we have to be smarter. We have to debate in a different manner, because there's more than two ways to skin a you-know-what. And I don't like that analogy, but it gets the point across. That's why I didn't say the word. And so unless we do that, they will take your children and wipe them off the face of the earth. They will be no Christians any longer. As soon as they step out of your house and into the world, it's not the same as if it was 30 or 40 years ago, because they don't want them coming back to your house to listen to your nonsense about Christianity. So think about that. Now, D'Souza gave me that idea because I was thinking about it a lot, because I get advice from Christians all the time, because I do a lot of different things on my show, and it's not the typical Christian show. And I'm not saying I was ever wanting it to be. I'm a journalist. But that's the kind of advice I would always get, even when I was an atheist. And I used to say, come on, people. I mean, I know exactly what he's talking about. Now, D'Souza, I will not agree with a lot of the things, and he may even be a plant that's trying to bring people away from Christianity. But you have to be smart enough, and if you can't take what he says, then I suggest all of your passing out of brochures and all of your, here's read the book of Genesis, read Leviticus, read this. It's a waste of time with atheists. And you may say, well, Greg, that's not right. I'm saying, look, sure, 1 out of a million, you may pick one up, get one to come closer to God that way, but that's not exactly the way to handle things in a real organized way, is it, for Christianity of today? If atheism has changed, Christianity has to deal with it. And unfortunately, they don't. Now, I like the idea sometimes when a Christian debates an atheist, to go right to the heart of things, to pass out Vatican literature, to show them what the evilness is amongst the different organizations of Christianity. Had you ever thought of that? And what about when I'm walking down the street and I see Mormons coming a mile away. They're always dressed the same, right? And they're going to talk to me. Hey, can we share the Book of Mormon with you? And my first reaction to them is, yes, you can, but let's talk about how the Book of Mormon how your book was written, and perhaps the sinister side of it. Did you ever think, we're not talking about Bible verses here. I could say something like, well, the Book of Mormon is not in tune with the Genesis, and read Genesis 6:1-4. But if you hit them with facts regarding certain things about their faith, I think you're doing something that would be far more valuable to them. They may just read it, because they won't look at you as a Bible-thumping Christian. And that goes for atheists. That goes for when you're talking to Catholics. And so all I'm saying is, the Word of God is important, but be smart enough to know your enemy and what you're dealing with today. So, like I said, D'Souza, brought that out because I was thinking about that as well, and I listened to this last night. I said, I got to play this, and I hope people are smart enough to pick out who he really is. There's some really interesting things here that he says that I don't particularly agree with, but then again, who do you agree with 100%? I'm going to say very honestly, he may be a plant, because there's certain things in there that just are very, very indicative of a Jesuit inside of Christianity. But that's me. I'm not going to say that he is, because I don't know enough about him. But I've listened to a few things, and maybe you guys will pick out some things too. I've lost track of time here, so let's see where we're at. Okay, we got about 5 minutes. We might as well get into it and then get into some of it in the second half, and then we'll play it tomorrow. Here we go. Okay, let's get this going. Hopefully the internet will work.
You see, I have a little bit of an unusual podium here. I'm really relieved I remembered to wear pants. Now, we are called in Scripture to contend for our faith, and I think that means something different today than it would have meant a generation ago, Because today we are living to a degree not seen before in secular culture. And that means that Christian assumptions, which used to be taken for granted in our society, are now no longer shared. Very interestingly, we have seen in recent years, not just atheism, but a kind of new atheism, more militant, more suave, more effective than the atheism of the past. In fact, if you thought of atheism 20 years ago, you'd think of someone like the activist Madeleine Murray O'Hair, or you might think of some kind of an ACLU lawyer. Not an atheism with mass appeal. Today, however, the new atheists are a pretty suave bunch. I'm thinking of people like the Oxford biologist Richard Dawkins, the author of the book The God Delusion, a book that sold, I believe, some 2 million copies. There's the English writer Christopher Hitchens, who writes every month in Vanity Fair. He's the author of the book God Is Not Great. And of course, Hitchens has the British accent, the Richard Burton voice, the artfully disheveled hair, the carefully crumpled pants. In other words, he makes a very suave appeal to young people, a kind of a rebel stance. And then there's the philosopher Daniel Dennett, the writer Sam Harris, who wrote the book The End of Faith. There's the bioethicist Peter Singer. It's a long list. And these new atheists have a very different agenda than the atheists of the past. In the past, what the atheists wanted to do is police the boundaries of church and state. So let's take down the 10 commandments from the Texas state capitol. That was their agenda. If you want to practice your faith at home or in private, that was okay. But the new atheists are very different. They want to attack Christianity in the private sphere also. They really want to make every Christian feel like a total idiot for believing in Christianity. And so this is a different kind of challenge than I think we've had in the past. Now, this atheist threat comes at a time when I think we as Christians are perhaps not as well prepared as we should be. And this is true of me as much as anyone else. I grew up in Bombay, India. My parents were Christian, part of a small Christian minority in India. So I learned my Christianity when I was 5 or 6. But when I look back on it, I say to myself, was that Christianity? Well, I call it crayon Christianity, right? It's a Christianity simplified to my very young mind. But see, many of us don't outgrow that Christianity. That's the Christianity I brought to America when I came as an exchange student at the age of 17. That's the Christianity a year later I took to the Dartmouth College campus. Now, interestingly, Dartmouth, like some of these Ivy League colleges, was founded as a Christian institution. Dartmouth specifically was founded to educate and Christianize the Indians. Sometimes I wonder how I got there. I think I misread the catalog, the part about the Indians. But what happens when you set foot on a secular campus is your beliefs come under attack.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break, come back with more of this on the Investigative Journal. Back in 3 minutes after these short messages.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn, the Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour. We're going to get back to Dinesh D'Souza in one moment. But go to my website at arcticbeacon, arcticbeacon.com, and then press that donate button. We're running a pledge drive all month to see if we can keep this show on the air. All right. Now, another thing, this is just me thinking. I think Christians are too damn nice sometimes when they're dealing with non-believers or atheists. They really are. And they get stepped on. And atheists will look at it and go, oh boy, this is going to be an easy kill. You know what I'm saying? But you know what's wrong with saying, stick that atheist thought right up your you-know-what. You're not going to mess around with me. And I might even throw a little expletive deletives in there. A few swear words. And then some Christian's going to say, Greg, you can't do that. And I'll say, you know what? You're going to let these people step all over you? What do you really believe in? What do? You just pass out a Bible verse and you let God do your talking for you? Unfortunately, we're here on the earth and we have to do the talking. And maybe he wants you to talk for him. And sometimes you got to deal with these people in a different manner, and I think Christians are too damn nice. Just my thoughts. Back with Dinesh D'Souza.
Under scrutiny. Hey, Dinesh, what? You believe someone was born of a virgin, walked on the ocean, brought dead people back to life? Are you out of your mind? We're living in the 20th century, now the 21st century. Don't you believe the world has fixed laws? You think these laws can be suspended at somebody's whim or discretion? The point I want to make is that at that young age, I felt I didn't have the tools to defend my beliefs. I found myself backing off, pulling away from Christianity, not because I didn't want to believe, but you could say my mind was getting in the way. And this is the strategy of the new atheists, to drive a wedge between the mind on the one side and, you may say, the heart on the other. I think a second issue, a second reason that as Christians we sometimes have difficulty with the new atheists is because we are accustomed, when we are faced with a problem, a question, to turn to the Bible. If somebody says, hey Christian, why do you believe this? We say, well, the book of Matthew says this, or the book of Leviticus says that. And that's a pretty good approach if you are speaking to a fellow Christian. But if you're speaking to a secular guy, or to an atheist, if I said this in a debate with Christopher Hitchens, he'd say, well, I don't care what the book of Matthew says. I reject the authority of the Bible to decide the matter. And then as Christians, we are a little tongue-tied because, well, that was our argument. So what I want to suggest this afternoon is that I think as Christians we would do better, you might say, to be a little more bilingual. And by bilingual, what I mean is to speak one language in church, but to learn a little bit of a different language when we step out into secular culture. Because we are often going to be dealing with people, and our children are going to be dealing with people who don't share our assumptions. Now, the new atheists are particularly targeting young people. Their point is, okay, we are going to let the Christian parents breed them, but at some point these parents are going to have to send their kids into the world. That's when we'll get them. Why? Because we, the atheists, are influentially ensconced in the media, in the universities, in education. So we're going to use the tools of skepticism and inquiry to challenge these young Christians and, you might say, torpedo their beliefs. What I'd like to do this afternoon is to take a couple of the strongest arguments of the new atheism and analyze them, answer them. Now, by the way, as Pastor Rick mentioned, I've been debating a bunch of these guys, and it's a very interesting challenge debating these. In a debate, you try to find the weak point of your opponent. You try to find the historical error, the logical fallacy. Some people say, well, how do you know if you're doing well? I say, well, I just kind of look over, and if I see a slight look of panic in my opponent's eye, I feel good. I feel like I'm getting through. But that's not what I want to do here. I'm not going to focus on the weak points of the new atheism. I'm going to focus more on its strong points. And what the new atheists have become very good at is surfing on the wave of current events. That's one reason they get a lot of media coverage. I was recently reading an article by one of these guys. He was talking about the war on terror. And he said the war on terror, the war against terrorism, he said that's a clash of competing fundamentalisms. Over here, Islamic fundamentalism. Over here, Christian fundamentalism. What do the two groups have in common? They're both fueling their fanaticism at the same holy gas station. In short, religion is the problem. He went on to write that 9/11 was, quote, a faith-based initiative. He said, if you look around the world, why are people fighting? The Shia and the Sunni in Iraq, they're fighting over religion. The Israelis and the Palestinians, they're fighting over religion. What about in Northern Ireland? They're fighting over religion. How about the Hindus and the Muslims? They're fighting over religion. Religion appears to be the reason why people are at each other's throats in today's world. And then he said, if you look at history, it's the same story. The Crusades, the Inquisition, the religious wars, the Salem witch trials. He says any rational person has to conclude that God is a menace in the world. If we could get rid of God and have a secular society, not only would it be more scientific, more rational, it would also be more peaceful, a more decent society. So this is the voice of the new atheism. The new atheists have also gotten very cunning about corralling our young people and pushing them up, if you will, against the wall. Hey, Christian, you call yourself a Christian, but have you done a comparative survey of all the religions of the world? No. Well, how do you know that your religion is true and everybody else's is false? What is the reason that you are a Christian? Isn't that it that your parents are Christian? You're a Christian because you were born in San Diego or Tulsa, Oklahoma. Had you been born in Afghanistan, you'd be a Muslim. If you were born in Thailand, you'd most likely be a Buddhist. So your Christianity is not the result of a quest for truth. It's the result of the accident of geography. I was in a debate not long ago with a prominent atheist, and he said, Dinesh, you're an atheist. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, there have been a lot of gods that have been advanced in the great sweep of human history. You don't believe in most of them, do you? He said, do you believe in Krishna? I said, no. Do you believe in Allah? No. Do you believe in Thor or Baal or Poseidon or Diana or Jupiter? No. He said, well, then when it comes to 99% of all the gods, you're an atheist. He goes, the only difference between me and you is I take your God and add him to this long list. Now, how are we as Christians to tackle the new atheism? I want to begin by saying a word about science. Partly because I think that the new atheism today marches behind the banner of science. The new atheists essentially say, look, science is a better way of knowing than Christianity. Why? Because science is based on reason. Christianity is based on faith. And as the atheists describe it, science is advancing and religion is retreating. Why? Because the atheists say that from the dawn of mankind, when people were ignorant and didn't know what caused things, they would attribute it to God. So ancient man looks out of his cave window, he sees lightning, he doesn't know what caused it, he goes, well, that must be the lightning god. Well, he hears thunder, doesn't know where that came from, that must be the thunder god. So, as the atheists say, but today we know that lightning is an electrical discharge. You don't need God to explain it. Science has explained it. And in the atheist narrative, what happened is that the Christians are always being proved wrong, and science is being proved right. So they'll say, for a thousand years, the medieval Christians believed the earth is flat. Then the brilliant scientists showed up, and they revealed that the earth is round. And the Christians used to believe that the earth is the center of the universe. Sun goes around the earth. But Copernicus and Galileo showed up and said, no, it's really the other way around. Earth goes around the sun. And then Darwin, who's become sort of the patron saint of modern atheism, Darwin came along to show that you don't need God. You can use chance and natural selection to try to explain the presence and the diversity of life on the planet. And this atheist notion of science is creeping its way into our textbooks. I've got a teenage daughter, and if I peek into her science books, you begin to see a little bit of this narrative beginning to make itself present. So what can we say about it? I mean, to me, what's very, very interesting is that this narrative of scientific advance and Christian retreat is based on about 3 crucial examples. And when you begin to look in at those examples more closely, you see that they are actually quite fragile, in fact, largely bogus. I'll give you a simple illustration of this. I did a little bit of historical investigation into the so-called flat earth theory, And I realized that educated people throughout the Middle Ages knew perfectly well that the earth is round. In fact, educated people at the time of Christ knew that the earth is round. In fact, the ancient Greeks, who lived 500 years before Christ, knew perfectly well that the earth is round. Why? Because actually you don't need Galileo's telescopes to figure it out. All you have to do is watch an eclipse. Here's the sun, here's the earth, here's the moon. You can see the shadow of the earth on the moon. Hey fellas, it's round. Aristotle knew that the earth is round. So the point I'm making is that the flat earth story is a complete legend. It's a complete myth. The other point I want to make that I think is interesting is that this whole notion of scientific advance and Christian retreat is a story that kind of happily goes along, but you'll notice it comes to a screeching halt at 1859. Exactly 150 years ago when Darwin published The Origin of Species. You might say, well, that's odd. Hasn't there been any science since then? There's actually been a lot. But interestingly, the science of the last 150 years, far from undermining Christianity, supports it in important and interesting ways. And this is why we never hear about it. I'd like to give you just a couple of brief examples, very eye-opening examples of what I mean. Several hundred years ago, somebody posed a question to the church father Augustine. This is Augustine who wrote Augustine's Confessions. And the question goes sort of like this. If you think about time, time goes back. But really, no matter how far back you go, you can always go further back, can't you? If somebody says, 2,000 years ago, well, before that, 2001 years ago. 1 million years ago. Well, before that was 1,000,001 years ago. So time seems to stretch in a kind of elastic, indefinite way, both into the past and into the future. And so the question that was posed to Augustine was, when did God make the universe? Did God actually create the universe? And if he did, what was he doing before that? In other words, how did God occupy his time, which he evidently had a lot of, prior to creating the universe? Now, Augustine gave a reply that is actually one of the most astounding replies ever given in the history of thought. He said, based on a meditation on the book of Genesis, he said, God created time along with the universe. In other words, before the universe, you have to put the word before here in quote marks, there was no time. Once upon a time, time did not exist. Now, this is a little bit of a mind bender, and really for many centuries, if you said it, it would be hard to explain. What do you mean that time had a beginning? But, interestingly, today, if you send your son or daughter right down the road to a Physics 101 course at UC Irvine or UC Berkeley, they will find out in the first 3 months that as a direct consequence of the so-called Big Bang, not only did the universe have a beginning, which is to say, not only did all matter have a beginning, but very interestingly, space and time also had a beginning. In other words, space and time are properties of our universe. Outside our universe, no space, no time. Now, the reason this is very interesting is that for 2,000 years, Christians have been saying two things. Number one, God is eternal. Eternal meaning not living forever on and on and on. Eternal in the sense of outside of time. And this concept of eternity, which seemed, from a scientific point of view, incoherent, now makes complete sense. If God is outside the universe, he's outside of time. Second, the ancient Hebrews said that there was nothing, and then there was a universe. Now, by the way, this is very different than what any other religion says. In many other religions, you have God or gods that, in a sense, fashion the universe, but they don't make it out of nothing. They take some other pre-existing stuff, and they basically sculpt the universe. But the ancient Hebrews said, no, there was nothing, and then we got a universe. And by the way, the ancient Hebrews, as far as I know, conducted no experiments. How did they find out? They basically said, God told us. And 2,000 years later, what I'm saying is that their description of what happened is pretty much right on. So this is an interesting way in which science is corroborating some very ancient claims that most of us have believed on faith, but the faith is now being buttressed, you might say, by reason. I'll give a second example that's worth thinking about, and this example has only come up in the last 30 or 40 years. Some leading scientists have looked at our universe, and they've noticed that it has a whole bunch of numerical values. You think about it, if I were to take this bottle of water and drop it, it will accelerate to the ground at a known rate. Gravity. So in our universe, there are all these constants and forces. The electromagnetic force. That happens to be also the speed of light. There's the strong nuclear force. There's something called the electroweak force. So there are all these numbers. One physicist named Lee Smolin, he says it's sort of like God is sitting at a big desk. And on the desk he has 100 different dials. Every dial is calibrated to a very specific number. And here's the question that the scientists are asking. What if we sneak into the room, and when God isn't looking, we fool with the dials? We just change them around a little bit. What would happen? And the scientists who look at this question say that what would happen is if you touch one of the dials and you move it, not 10%, not 1%, but 1 part in 100,000 million, you would have no universe, you would have no life. This, by the way, is a topic that is described by the physicist Stephen Hawking in his book, A Brief History of Time. If you look in there, you'll find the example I just gave. The whole idea is that the entire universe appears to be a kind of gigantic plot to make possible, well, us. Now, this idea, which is sometimes called the anthropic principle, or in a more colloquial way, the fine-tuned universe, this argument has put modern atheism totally on the defensive. Why? First of all, it's an argument utterly immune to Darwinian attack. We're not talking about whether the dog and the wolf had a common ancestor. We're talking about how we got a universe in the first place, and why the constants of the universe that have existed for a long, how did they get so calibrated for life? I was in a debate some months ago against a physicist, and he was clearly very shaken by this idea of the fine-tuned universe, but he said, I think I can account for it. And I said, how? He goes, well, maybe there are multiple universes. I said, really? How many? He goes, frankly, I don't know, but he goes, I think there probably are an infinity of universes out there. And if there are an infinity of universes, it's not that surprising that one of them, unlikely though it may seem, happens to be suited for life. That just happens to be the one we're in. And I said to him, this is really a far-out, fantastic, and kind of a thrilling idea that you've got all these universes. I said, what is the scientific or empirical evidence for it? He goes, well, there is none. And I said, well, that's okay, but you're at the frontiers of scientific research. Do you expect that evidence will be coming in the next 20 or 50 or maybe 100 years to give some empirical support for this really exciting theory? He goes, oh, no, not only is there no evidence, there never will be. And at this time, genuinely curious, I said, well, why not? And he said, well, because if there are other universes, they would operate according to other laws. In other words, they would be permanently cut off from our universe. We could never find out about them. And I said to him, look, I said, wow. I said, I would like to believe that, but I just don't think I have that much faith. In other words, you have very intelligent people, no doubt, to get around the idea of God. They are now forced to posit things like an infinity, to abolish one invisible God. They've got to manufacture an infinity of invisible universes. All of this tells me that as Christians, this is not a road, science, that we should be afraid of. This is a road we should be heading down with our magnifying glasses, because there's a lot of good stuff to be found. I could go on and on about science, but I'm watching a clock in the back of the room, and for reasons of time, I need to adopt the motto that King Henry VIII used with one of his wives. He said, I can't keep you too long. So I need to fast forward a little bit and talk about morality. I want to address head on the question I raised earlier, namely, is it true that Christianity is responsible for violence, terrorism, war, conflict? This is actually one of the magic bullets in the holster of modern atheism, and it's very important that we be able to meet it head on.
Okay, we're going to meet that head on tomorrow, as we only have 1 minute here on the Investigative Journal. So why don't you think about what he was saying in that first opening salvo that he gave regarding the universe and other things. And if you have any comments about it, email me at gregbeacon@gmail.com. Would love to hear about it. Tell your friends about the show. And that's why, if you tell your friends, maybe we'll get more listeners. That's how we have to do it on a show like this. Advertisers run anytime they hear the Vatican. And isn't it interesting that apparently, and I haven't listened to the whole speech, and I haven't listened to his other speeches. I've listened to some. I've watched this documentary. But I'd be surprised if he ever starts to differentiate Catholicism from Christianity. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.